Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us on Biz Talk, APA's online series discussing business topics relevant to the photo community.
Mobilize, collaborate, or connect them with creatives for hire.
Sorry, boomer issues.
Oh, no worries. I'm Cassandra Plavoukos. I'm a commercial portrait and editorial photographer and an APA LA board member, and I will be guest hosting today's talk. This week, we are hearing the experiences and perspectives of Black photographers. And before we begin, I'd like to introduce Juliet Wolf-Robin. She is the National Director of APA. And Juliet, would you like to say a few words?
Hi, I just wanted to remind everybody that APA, American Photographic Artists, we are a not-for-profit association of professional photographers. We are here for the photo community. No one owns APA, so we are run by photographers, for photographers, and the information that we put out is information that is of interest to photographers based on feedback from our community. So if there's other things you would like to see us working on or doing, or you want to participate, we're really interested in having your voice. I know that from looking at the registration that mostly it's photographers who have signed on today, which is fantastic. You're our audience. So make sure that we hear from you and we know what you would like to see going on. We're so appreciative of the group that's here today and the people who are willing to participate with APA and share their experiences and their stories. I'm really excited about today, and I'm excited about where APA is going in the future as well. So thank you, and thank you to those who are participating. I'm going to be monitoring the questions if you have questions during the show. But know that this is a free-form conversation, and we may or may not get to them as it goes on, but we will certainly try.
Thank you, Juliet. So I just want to start out by saying that APA stands in solidarity in the fight against racism and injustice and supports diversity and inclusivity. And that's a very important thing for me to know. And so we're very honored, and I'm very excited today that we have with us three very talented and diverse photographers. I'll go ahead and get started with the introductions. We will move to Keith Majors first, because I think we're still waiting for Oriana. Lynsey, were you able to get her?
Yes, I sent her a text, and hopefully she will be here as soon as possible.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and introduce Keith Major. Keith Major is a New York City native with more than 30 years of experience and a roster of A-list clients, including Sony Music, Colgate-Palmolive, Essence, and Cosmopolitan. Keith has achieved his childhood dreams and established a sterling reputation as one of New York's most talented and productive commercial photographers. And then we have Lindsey Weatherspoon. Lynsey is a commercial portrait and editorial photographer based in both Atlanta and Birmingham. Capturing heritage is important to her and evident in such personal projects as portraits of former members of the Negro Baseball League, Ronnie the Shoe Repairman, the Gullah Geechee culture of the Sea Islands, and Birmingham's historic Ensley neighborhood. And I believe I will go ahead and introduce Oriana as well, and hopefully they will be joining us shortly. Oriana Koren is a photo ethnographer, writer, and historian based in Los Angeles. Over the last 5 years, Oriana has focused their lens and personal research on African diasporic foodways, mining the intersections of collective memory, revisionist histories, and the migration of Black Americans from the South across the nation. So with that said, I'd like to welcome each of you again. And I know yesterday we had a brief conversation, and we talked about what the last few weeks have been like for each of you, the last few months, and even the last few years. Even though you've each had similar experiences, there've also been some very, diverse experiences that you've had as well. So if you wouldn't mind, I think I'd like to maybe start with that and then take it from there. So Keith, would you like to talk to us a little bit about kind of what you've been going through these last couple weeks, months, years, and about your experience in photography and what it means to you and as a Black man and more?
I think one of the things that has happened recently for me is being able to share actual stories related to photography vis-a-vis racism. And what I mean by that is I recently put up a post where I told the story of a time where I was a photo assistant and was coming out of Lens and Repro, which was a photo rental house in New York at the time. This was, I think, 1984, or maybe 85, probably 85. I'm walking down the street with photo gear and a cop car comes around the corner, barreling around the corner, kind of sees me, almost pulls up on the sidewalk. They leap out the car and they say, get up against the wall. And I'm like, what? And then one of the guys goes, snatches the bag, and the other one goes, I said, get up against the, I'll refrain from cursing, but he cursed. And I realized at that moment, you know, having grown up the way I grew up, I knew that, okay, if I try to plead my case, they're just gonna start beating me, and the people on the street are just gonna think I'm just another black guy who deserves some kind of beating. So they put me in the back of the car. And the sad thing is that I understood. And so I'm in the back of the car and I'm like, okay, I'll just explain to them who I am, what I'm doing, what the equipment was. And they didn't care. They didn't care that I went to school for photography, that I was a photo assistant for this said photographer, that I could tell them what was in the bag. All they could say was, well, somebody that fit your description stuck up Lens and Repro. And I was appalled at the idea that they were content to just sit there, because it was sort of like, not only were my rights being violated personally, but it's like, I also use the photo rental house and I don't want it robbed either, because, right. You know what I mean? And that part was completely ignored. And so a story like that, I could share, and it felt like a relief to actually, you know, get that kind of story across, so that my colleagues who are not Black like me could begin to understand that, you know, I work in a different space at times, and that, you know, just knowing that we can begin to make changes.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And Lynsey, what about you? Like, what's been happening with you the last couple weeks, months, years?
Well, before I answer your question, I want us to know that George Floyd's memorial service, his funeral, is happening now. Yeah. And I would be remiss if we did not acknowledge that it should not have been this way. And unfortunately, we are still having this talk about something that is, you know, a treacherous thing for every single Black life that exists. So I want to make sure that we lift up his name, along with Breonna Taylor, along with Ahmaud Arbery. And I just happened to be in Brunswick where those activities occurred, and also lift up the name of Tony McDade and the countless others who have lost their life to such a tragedy as this. So I wanted to start off by saying that before, you know, I moved into what I had to say. Thank
you for that. Thank you.
As far as my experience, there are so many, but the one that usually sticks out to me is I have been working on a personal project for the past 4 years about the Gullah Geechee culture, which is also in the same county as Brunswick, where the whole Ahmaud Arbery incident occurred. And while I was photographing a participant, we were approached by the police. And I had my stuff in the car, and I'm taking a picture of a gentleman. And all of a sudden, I see his hand on his gun holster. I'm just like, for one, I'm trying to move out of your way. And I feel like that was an unnecessary action to occur while I am literally photographing a gentleman, Mr. Charles, who was standing in front of the home where his father was once a slave. So being in that very moment, just thinking about that, you know, it's harmful to want to archive the history of so many people that look like me, that sound like me, that talk like me, but have to have it in the back of your mind that there may be some dangerous aspect to doing that. And it's again, it's disheartening, yet it fuels the fire within inside of us to continue to make this work, to photograph this work, because even in tragedy, I've always heard that even in tragedy, there is this beauty that comes out of it. And even in this tragic moment that we are having right now, whatever that beauty is going to look like, I hope that we're all able to see that come to light. So yeah, I'm just gonna end there because I don't want to go into another question that you may have coming up for the rest of us.
But it's okay if you do, because that's,
Yeah.
that's kind of the purpose and the intent, is to just have an open dialogue and discussion. And as Juliet mentioned in the beginning, it's a free-form conversation. So that's one of the reasons why I don't really have questions written down, because I know that it's going to go there, and we kind of talked about that a little bit yesterday, Keith, and you mentioned how, there's this perception that it could possibly go off on a tangent, and I'm okay with that. I'm sure, our listeners are okay with that, because it's all relevant and it's all important. And I think we would be remiss if we didn't, let that naturally occur. So I'm sure we'll come back to that. We can add to that, because there were some things that you mentioned yesterday. We talked about, some things that have happened to you even on set. So I'm sure we'll come back around to that. But I'd like to welcome and introduce Oriana, who's actually now joined us. And so again, Oriana, we're just kind of starting with, and I'm actually going to just back up a second, because yesterday when we had our initial meeting, I started by asking, like, what's been going on? How can you express what's happened in the last couple of weeks and, months? And then you were like, I can even go back further than that. Forget about the last couple of weeks. This is where I've been, and this is what's been going on with me. So I would love it if you could share that with everyone, because that really, I think that kind of struck me as something that, like, I had no idea. And I think, Keith, even you were like, wow, I did not know this, so if you wouldn't mind elaborating a little bit.
Thank you again so much for providing us the space to not only talk about our experiences, but to be in conversation with our larger community. It's really important. And it feels especially significant right now. So thank you all again.
Very welcome.
Space. I'm a patterns person. So I recognized pretty quickly that the sort of abuses that I was facing at work increased exponentially once our current administration took over. And I don't find that to be accidental in the least bit, especially considering a good majority of the research that I've done for myself has been around US history, and specifically looking at the ways in which policy and administrations can, for lack of a better term, sort of activate just very deep-rooted white supremacy that is ingrained in our culture. And when you're a person of color, and specifically a Black person, you start to feel these things on a daily basis in a way that you cannot ignore. The other thing that occurred was when I started shooting editorial work, I was leaving the wedding industry space and I was leaving the Midwest, completely starting my life over. And part of that starting over was me coming to the recognition that I never really identified as female, and that my gender was actually non-binary. So then that added to the mix a very insidious form of misogynoir. So racism that is specifically targeted to Black women and Black femmes. That started creeping up in ways that felt very, very uncomfortable. And I've been lucky that I have really good friends and I'm a part of this great collective, and we came together for the purpose of talking about these experiences, just to kind of air them out, to give our souls and ourselves space to, to move through the world without that baggage. And we recognized very quickly that if we were not going to set about the work of actively pushing the industry to decolonize, it would never happen. And a lot of us would not be able to make even a decent living just doing the work that we feel passionate about, that we have put in our 10,000 hours for, the sort of work that we have, personal experience with. So I've been in the mindset of watching how the industry moves, given the fact that we've got this administration in office. And now with the uprisings, I'm looking at people far more closely, because everyone is pouring out support. But as we're seeing, when you actually talk to people behind the scenes, that support amounts to bandwagoning, and the industry needs something far more serious than hopping on a trend if it's going to do right by Black photographers and other photographers of color.
Right. So we actually, that was something that came up yesterday as well. And I remember writing down, words like actionable. It's great to listen and join the conversation and, all of those things. But the idea of taking people to task and making sure that, you're giving access and that it's not just talk, I think is something that we all, feel that's very, very important. So thank you for that. And if I can just ask you, Keith, can you just tell us, how have you seen the industry change like in the last 30 years, like given what's going on today versus, have you seen shifts? Have there been improvement?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's one conversation that we haven't had. Because when I entered the business, there were Black advertising agencies. There was a robust marketplace for me. And so I recognized right away that I was able to sort of move in this sort of like smaller ocean, as opposed to the Pacific Sea. I was sort of like one of the Great Lakes, which was African-American culture. And so I had a wonderful career shooting for a variety of hair care ads and car ads that featured Black people. I shot all kinds of things. I remember being the guy who shot the artwork for the first relaxer box for Black girls called Just For Me. Those were my photographs, And then, as I watched my daughter grow and society changed, the Black ad agency kind of went the way of Negro League Baseball, where we started to get more inclusion, and I bring up my daughter because I remember her watching TV and she had choices. Now, my daughter's now 28, but watching her watch TV in the 90s, it was like, wow, I remember when we used to just sort of pile the whole family in front of that one Black TV show that we got every once in a blue moon. And she could like find several things to, choose from, or even what you might call, multicultural shows where the cartoons had all kinds of people. I just didn't grow up that way. But the casualty was, as the general market agencies started being more diverse and the culture of the US became more diverse, the Black ad agency disappeared. And as digital media became more prevalent, Black magazine disappeared. And so, and CDs, packaging, and record company checks disappeared. And so I watched, for me, people like myself, the thing began to shrink. And then the really interesting thing happened. Then I noticed that white photographers who used to be able to ignore my marketplace began to compete with me for the same jobs. And so that, for instance, I had a gig with Procter & Gamble through Burrell Agency called My Black is Beautiful. And I did well. I had it for 7 years. That's amazing. But I do have a chip on my shoulder that the Polish art buyer and the Polish art director replaced me with the Jewish photographer. And I felt like I have so many peers and colleagues in my lane that could have replaced me. Why did it have to be the Jewish lady? Not that I have anything against, I don't have anything against Jews. I certainly, in fact, the home that I live in, it was a lovely Jewish family that lent my parents the money to buy the home. But my thing is sort of like, I know that I would never be considered for my Jewish heritage if it were a photo job that had that title. So how is it that I would feel better if the playing field were fair, so that if she can compete in my arena, I can compete in her arena. But that just wasn't the case for us. And so I'm concerned that as much as we want inclusion, are we going to also create our own as well? Will the youth begin to do their own publications and create their own platforms? in sort of the spirit of, you know, Oklahoma City's Black Wall Street, where you just try to, you know, do it for yourself, because that's part of the growth. You know, it's one thing to be included, but it's also another thing to have your own.
So I totally agree with you, and I feel like this idea that, you know, all eyes are on us right now, right? It's like, well, we've never taken our eyes off of us, you know what I mean? And so the idea that we have stories to tell, we've always had stories to tell. The stories that are happening now, you know, should be told by us, you know? So this idea of not hiring photographers of color, Black photographers, and, you know, I think is something that we all are dealing with and facing and having to figure out a way to navigate that world. Because, you know, and again, I'm looking at notes, you know, we talked about respect, we talked about ethics, we talked about visibility and exploitation. And so you kind of, you know, I mean, I know me personally, I've had to put up the armor. You know, I was told, you know, several years ago that my portfolio wasn't diverse enough. So I started adding more people of color into my portfolio. Then I was told that I had too many Black people in my portfolio. You know what I mean? So it's like, how do you get the job? Do you want diversity or do you not want diversity? Do you know what I mean? So I completely hear what you're saying. And it's, you know, it's unfortunate, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation. And I'd love to hear from you, Lynsey, and you as well, Oriana, on, you know, kind of, you know, what your thoughts are as far as that. And, you know, are you putting yourselves out there more in bidding on jobs, or are you finding that people are coming to you more? And how are you feeling about that? Are you feeling, you know, like, why now, you know, or yeah, I got it, I'll do this, you know, like, how is that affecting you?
So I'll let Oriana take over.
Something like 4.5, close to 5 years ago now, myself and a handful of Black and brown women who had been invited into the Women Photograph database recognized something that we'd seen happen just generally. And the thing that was kind of getting our goat was that the group had a fantastic Facebook group. I was still on Facebook at this time, and we could ask each other questions like, how do I bid on this? X, Y, and Z wants me to do X, Y, and Z. Does that seem fair? You know, the sort of support that you need when you're a larger community, especially as Black folks, because we don't always have access to those resources. So anything that provides us access allows us mobility in the industry, and that access and those resources are very important. And we picked up very quickly that the white women in the group would respond to one another. But if a Black or brown woman had a same or similar question, that question would sit unanswered for days at a time. We got together and we're like, you know, this is not just a database thing. This is something that we face in person. And when we are trying to get meetings or when we are pitching work to people, there's always this wall of resistance. And so we initially were like, we're gonna all get together, have some sort of a like town hall forum, because we need to get these things out. There's a lot of poison that we have to carry around quietly, and we were tired of doing that. So we figured, you know, why not air that out amongst your colleagues who get it and understand those experiences. And by the end of that day, we recognized that we had to start a action-based collective. It was very obvious that the things that we knew that we needed and deserved would not be granted to us, that we would have to fight for it. So I then went from just being a photographer to now being a photographer and being an activist in the photo industry space. Through the collective, I decided to start a new photo award because I was frankly getting tired of being dicked around by PDN. I had gotten nominated a couple of years in a row. There was one year where a ton of Black and brown people, ton of people of color got nominated. And then the list came out and there were like, you know, 2 of us on the list. And in joking, again, letting off steam, a friend was like, let's just make our own list. And I'm the sort of person, when someone says something like that, it's not a joke to me. Like I'm working on the website, and that's what I did. I was like, okay, let's do it. Let's make the list. We have the resources. We have a collective. You know, like that PDN 30 wasn't a thing until someone decided it was a thing. Someone had to come up with the idea to create a photo award specifically for 30 people who were under the age of 30 you know, early career, mid-career. So I was like, why can't we just do that? We have the internet. We have tools. It's easy to put a website together, and we can figure out how to, you know, start to amass some of the resources that we don't have access through this award specifically. Because the conversation in the industry was, inclusion is good. It's about time we start including people of color. But the actions were not actually adding up to actual inclusion. And that's always been an issue. I think the thing that we all have to keep in mind is, part of the reason we're having this conversation is because we're having a global conversation about white supremacy. And you don't have to be a white person to be a white supremacist.
Right.
So we're often dealing with people who, you know, are technically skin folk, but they're not our kinfolk. They are also chasing after the awards and the accolades and the proximity to whiteness. So they get in the way of progress also. For me, it's very important that we get to the root of the issue. I don't like Band-Aids. We're here because of Band-Aids. We cannot do Band-Aids anymore. We really have to own up to the fact that our industry has lost its way when we talk about what it means to be an ethical and moral photographer. And part of the conversation we're having now is, how do you document a global civil rights movement? Who gets to be in front of that story? Knowing that we already know someone's going to win a Pulitzer, someone's going to win this award, someone's going to win that award. The moment that's occurring right now is significant for careers, and it's also significant to my life. Because if this movement does not take off, I am in a lot of trouble. All of us are in a lot of trouble. So we need to also be open to the fact that we get to points in our work where ethics are important, morality is important, and you have to pick what side you stand on, period.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Lindsey, would you like to add to that?
You know, Oriana, she did such a fantastic job. I don't know if I can add any more to it. But to piggyback off of what everyone is saying, you know, I'll go in order. I'll start from last to come back to you, Cassandra. But as far as Oriana and the collective, I do certainly appreciate them as far as what they not only helped me with, but the rest of that inaugural lit list of people, and to watch us, you know, pretty much spread our wings and prove to the world that these Black, POC, queer, LGBTQIA, binary, non-binary folks, what we have the capability of doing. So I want to say thank you to Oriana for that. As far as, you know, just understanding what the optics look like when it comes to being a Black photographer, you know, I want to just scratch gender just for a second, but just looking at a bare bones perspective of being Black and being a photographer is understanding that we know ourselves better than anyone else could ever know us. And being within your own self, you know, bringing in the several identities of yourself going into your work, there's a different type of compassion that you have for your culture. You go in knowing the nuances, the language, the slang, the moves, and it just makes it much more adaptable when you have someone that is part of the culture photographing the culture. So that brings me to now. We are in a global pandemic, we're in an economic pandemic, and we're also having this pandemic of racism, white supremacy, police brutality. I can't strip away any of those identities about myself, and it brings so much more up to the surface. Having to understand, and I believe we talked a little bit about this yesterday, being out in the protest, as, you know, me being Black, Black, queer, and woman in a space where there are police and violence, and understanding that the safety issues that I or anybody else have to consider when we're out in that environment. You don't know what's going to happen. You pray that nothing's going to happen to you, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you, as your full self, are photographing what is going on. I would hate for somebody else to tell my story. You know, I'm from Birmingham. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. So one of like the hotbeds of the civil rights movement. And I think about church services, and I think about the statement, I don't want, how's it go? I don't want a rock to cry out for me. So in that same sense, I don't want a white person to cry out for what I already know has been going on. And I want to be that person that documents what is going on to my own people. So it's a very hard place to be in, because you know that the same violence or the same issues that have occurred to the people that we know their names, and even the ones that we have not heard about, those who have passed away, being in that space and thinking of your safety, your longevity, your culture, even the safety of the people who are out here going to protest and rallies and marching for themselves. There's a due diligence that me and the rest of the photographers who are out there documenting have for right now. And I really hope that I'm making sense. You know, what I'm saying is making sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a moment that is unimaginable right now. And right now, you don't understand it unless you are out there. And that is no slight to people who have not gone. I totally understand. Everybody is doing their part somewhere. But when you are out there purposely with a goal and a mission, just to make sure that you are documenting what is really going on versus what you actually read or hear, it makes it even more important to have people on the ground who look like me documenting this monumental moment.
Absolutely. And just to go back a second to you, Oriana, you mentioned the collective. I just want to make sure everybody knows that it's the Authority Collective, correct? And then the list that you're referring to is the lit list.
That's correct.
So that you all can check that out. And I'm looking at some of the questions here. I have a question from Vaughn Thomas, and I think we kind of touched on this a little bit, but Vaughn is asking, as a Black photographer, have you had to downplay your Blackness to work for white clients? And for instance, does your portfolio have to have more white images than Black images? So I know I kind of mentioned that a little bit, but if each of you could touch on that as well. Have you ever been in a situation where you've had to kind of downplay your Blackness in order to get a job or fit in or even feel safe on set? Because I think, you know, we touched upon that a little bit as well yesterday.
I was writing about this very topic just before we got on. And for me, I think having grown up, I was born in '62, so I grew up in the '70s. And I grew up with a really strong Black Power movement. And what that did for me is I was armed with this confidence. And so I have worked with a lot of white clients. And yeah, we have, as Black people, you often have that code switch where, you know, you're speaking to them in ways that they can understand. But I never felt like I was downplaying my Blackness. Sometimes I just was being myself, because I was armed with this feeling that I belonged, that I was worthy, that I had done the work. And I've always personally felt that the racists were morally inferior, and that the idea that their self-esteem was tied to my existence made them small to me. So even when I was confronted with the battles and the fights, and I had them, I still felt I belonged in the room. And also, I knew that I was a human being first, so that as much as I loved Black music, and I knew that we were the avant-garde of music in America, I liked white music too. And so I knew that my taste was diverse, and I put my portfolio together in that way. It was primarily Black because I'm Black and I travel in Black circles, but it wasn't a deliberate thing. There were white models that I worked with in the beauty space, and I liked doing it all. And I governed myself accordingly. I think that it's a self-esteem issue. And in a perfect world, my real mission was always to elevate the Black image in the way that it worked for me, so that I wanted some of my photographs to wind up in your house the way the Angela Davis poster was in mine. You know, the way that the Black Fist in the Air at the 68 Olympics poster was in my house. You know what I mean? Because those images gave me so much strength and so much pride that I was able to walk into white spaces fully actualized as a human being, knowing that we all have different experiences, but my people are dope. And y'all could be dope too at times when you're not racist. You know, we can all be fly, you know, but you're not fly when you're a racist. You're just an idiot, you know? And I think, yeah, and so if I'm answering the question at all, yeah, I did work in white spaces, but I never felt like I had to remix myself in that space. I do know that I mentored some kids, and like one photographer in particular that I mentored, you know, I had to explain to him, because the other thing that I noticed was with the younger generation, because they had grown up with they'd grown up with a Black president, with a media that was diverse, so many things came to them as a shock. Like, you know, like for instance, quickly, I can tell the story that when Trump won, this feeling came over me. And it was familiar, but then I couldn't figure it out. And it took me about a week to figure out what it was. It was 1972 Keith that understood that my country didn't love me, that white people were dangerous, and you had to watch how you moved about. And that just returned like whoosh, like right away when he won. But I knew that my daughter, who's like 28 now, didn't grow up that way. And so it was kind of a shock to her when these things started happening. I forget what my point was. I guess, and so I remember when I had a young brother that I had to mentor, and you know, he was about being the young Black man that he was. And he would come into the studio with his pants hanging down and you know, talking how we talk amongst ourselves. And it was like, dude, I'm like, that's not gonna work. Like, I understand that you have the right to be that, but when we go to Park Avenue and photograph this lady, you don't see me like, my pants isn't hanging down, and I'm not carrying myself that way. There's sort of like a general meeting place where we come together, where we can all do business, and I can't bring the complete avant-garde of my culture with me in that space. Not that, and that's not to say that you don't deserve to be that, but you know, I just can't I need to let you know that this exists. Now you can make a choice. You can decide, I don't care, I'm gonna do my thing, I'm gonna have my underwear hanging out. But I need you to know that there's another way of doing things that has been a norm for me. And I want you to win. And I want you to be at least equipped to make the choice. Because right now you don't even know that this sort of thing exists, that, you know, that there is sort of like a meeting space. Because I feel like even when I'm working with white clients, that they have to meet me halfway as well, you know. When they walk into the room, I'm gonna be playing my music, you know, you're gonna have to meet me there too. And I'm going to, you know, bring whatever my culture is with me as well, but in a space that's fair for all of us. Yeah, so
but can I interject just for a second?
Absolutely.
But isn't it wild to think that we have to have this perception of ourselves as Black, you know, let's remove photographer, that we can't even, you know, we have to think about how we dress, how we talk, how we look, how we express. Yet I don't know any white photographer that I've ever experienced or at least paid attention to had to do this whole code switching thing. It got to a point where even now, you know, I'm proud to be from the South, and sometimes I'll, you know, try to hide that, and I'm like, for what? This is me, and it makes absolutely no sense to hide who I am, because it's going to show up in, you know, what I do, what I photograph, what I eat, you know, things of that nature. So just to have that mindset of we can't, you know, be our full selves outside, inside, mind-wise, I think
Mhm.
that is, you know, something that is troubling to me. And especially
Mhm.
these days, you just want to be yourself no matter what you do and where you work. Because I do know of, you know, certain, you can think about jobs, you know, Keith, me and you, we both, I don't know if you've experienced, but I can speak for myself, but as far as having locks, before I was a full-time professor, I'm sorry, a full-time photographer, I was a full-time professor at several universities. I taught public speaking. So when I was growing my hair, I left out this part. I was teaching at predominantly white institutions, and I was starting my locks then. And at that time, I'm just very, I didn't think that I was supposed to do that. I thought that I looked unprofessional, although I didn't feel like it, but I feel like I would have been told that just because of the environment that I was in. So even those microaggressions when it comes to your hair, your accent, just any part of you showing up to a job, it's like, who cares what I look like? You hired me because you knew what I was doing. So I would hate for anybody to, you know, miss out on an opportunity just because of these small things that in certain spaces shouldn't matter.
Right.
I'm going to piggyback off of that.
Yes, please. Thank you.
There's just like a great moment of
Mhm.
generational learning that's happening. My father grew up in the 60s. He is one of my closest friends. We talk about everything. And we were estranged for a moment in time. So I've been catching him up on what it's been like for me to walk around as a professional. So one of the first things he saw me do in that capacity last year when I was teaching a lecture on the responsibilities of artists in times of political strife, which was kind of how I was putting it then. But what I did was, knowing the space that I was in, as photojournalists in Colorado, as majority white kids, I wanted to have a really serious conversation with them about how white supremacy affects my life and how they benefit from the work that they do, especially when they are exploiting the images of Black death. This was the first time my dad heard me talk in a professional capacity. So at lunch, you know, we're talking the way Black people do. And he's like, you really were having a word with those folks, weren't you? And I was like, yes, because I came to learn something and recognize something very, very quickly. When I left wedding photography, I think a year and a half later, a series of extrajudicial police killings occurred. And around the time that Tamir Rice was murdered, I had a series of white people who I had spent a decade of my life with explain to me why it was okay that a Black child should be murdered in the street. And after I had those conversations and essentially lost an entire social circle, I had to get real with myself about what it means to stand up in my Blackness, especially at work. There are too many Black folks who have been repressed and subdued at work, who have been forced to mold themselves into something that's palatable for white supremacy, when instead what should be happening is we should be questioning, again, like Lynsey said, why it's even necessary for me to decide, oh, I'm not going to play the Migos because X, Y, and Z person is here. When I left Chicago, all of the like new gentrified restaurants that had opened up were suddenly blaring hip hop all the time. It was the most jarring thing to me. But people enjoyed it and they liked it. And then when I do that on set, people have issues. Turn the music down. I don't like it. Why are you playing this? You know, it's too much cursing, etc. I will never back down from that. Because if you get to show up at work and you get to revel in your racism, I should be able to revel in who I am as a person without having to feel like I could possibly lose a job or I, you know, could possibly get shadow banned or what have you. The kind of what's occurring that I don't think we pay enough attention to is something that Toni Morrison speaks about, and it's how white supremacy's function is distraction. Instead of worrying about what I'm listening to or how my hair looks, why are we not thinking about all of the additional weight that I have to bring with me because I am Black and because I know I have to do these things? I have to perform a certain way in order for you to feel like I should be in this space. Why are you not concerned with how that is possibly affecting the output that I'm supposed to be providing for you? Why is the concern that I'm not acting palatable for you to want to be around. That's something that I just have not really, no one's given me an explanation for that, and I'm very curious about it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, being from an older generation in that space, I just always was ready for the fight. And so I would walk into the room like, I belong here, I'm dope, and don't try me. And it worked, like, you know, it worked. I didn't always get the job, but I never felt like I was demeaning myself or belittling myself just to be in the space. Yeah, there were times where I acted professional, but, you know, going back to the locks thing, I just grew my locks because that's what I wanted to do. And I never even gave it a thought. It's funny because I was working for a studio at one point, and my plan for the studio was, and it worked out perfectly, was I'm gonna work for the studio, I'm gonna hustle after work and in evenings, and they're either gonna fire me because I get too busy, or I'm gonna be able to quit because I got too busy, and the latter happened. But I remember when I started growing my locks, one of the studio managers, white guy from Connecticut, decided to resign. He just, you know, and he was having questions about what he wanted to do with his life. But when I started my locks, he resigned, because it was sort of like, and it was kind of an unspoken thing where I felt like he felt like, wow, how can I be around my white friends who come and go in this studio and I'm allowing this black kid to have dreads at work? I mean, that's what I felt, and I felt like, you know, and it's a shame that I even thought that, like I should even consider any of that. But, you know, I'd be lying if I didn't say that race thing was not a thing. You know, I just always fought it. Because you got to remember, I went to photo school in Rochester, and in 1980, you know, hip hop hadn't changed our culture enough that white kids loved us. So I was just, you know, and the school that I went to didn't have a portfolio program at that time. So I was in school with kids who were just doing photography for the first time. And I'm this little Negro from New York City who had been at the High School of Art and Design, and I had done classes at Pratt Institute. And I was like at the top of the class immediately. In 1980, when, you know, the idea of having a black president was, you know, preposterous. And so I had to fight professors, I had to fight students, but I had the armor, you know, knowing, you know, I think we have always homeschooled our children because we've had to prepare them for the nonsense that happens when you leave the front door. And so I had that armor. I can say this though, I love the world that the younger folks have grown up in. I love their energy. I love your way of being yourself and taking no prisoners in that space. I also like that many of the young black photographers, and particularly the females, just do their thing, and it's such a beautiful work. And it's so unapologetic. It just warms my heart. And so what's happened for me is, you know, as you age, you become more mentor, and like I like answering the questions and helping, but for the most part, I'm like, yo, go, folks, go. Like, do your thing. I love what y'all are doing.
So that actually brings me to a question that I'm seeing here from Nora K, talking about the youth specifically. And so it says here, seems like there's a media blackout of the protests. How are you all reaching out to the youth on the front lines today to encourage and support them to capture the iconic images in the street? So that's the question. But then also if you could expand on that to talk about, you know, how you're reaching out, like Keith, you just mentioned mentoring in general, you know, with people, you know, of color who are in those kinds of, you know, positions that could also join the cause, so to speak, and help, you know, put things into action. So if you could each speak with that. Maybe Lynsey, you want to start?
Yeah, so it's been an overwhelming week. Just briefly how all of this pretty much occurred is that in Atlanta, we had our protest that started on May 29th, so that was a Friday. I went out, and that was the first time I'd ever photographed a protest. You know, I felt comfortable being there amongst the crowd, and you know, I got home and uploaded my photos from Friday, and my social media just blew up. So I would say I had around 37 or 3,800 followers when this all started, you know, a week ago, to now over 15,000 people who are watching what is going on in Atlanta, or just, you know, just pretty much the experiences of Black photographers who are out there documenting, you know, this time. And to answer your question, as far as the youth who are out there doing the same thing, whether by, you know, DSLR or cell phone, I think they are doing the service, especially since, you know, for one, they're younger, and they have the mentality to just show it all, and I appreciate that. Because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't see as much as we see right now. You know, me and the rest of us are only out there for maybe like a millisecond, but then you have people who are younger than us who are out there all day. So, you know, kudos to them, because I feel like that the next generation, we're all going to be in great hands. And you know, even though we sometimes chastise them for being the social media generation, if it weren't for them, we wouldn't be having these types of conversations today. We wouldn't even, you know, this wouldn't even be a thought. We wouldn't even see the things that we see, you know, whether it's, you know, good or bad. It's all here for a reason. They know how to use it way better than some of us do, and they use it for a powerful purpose. So I haven't seen a blackout. That's me. I don't want to speak for anybody else. I haven't seen much of a blackout, but what has been encouraged is, especially last Tuesday when there was that blackout with the, you know, the black squares and tagging it with Black Lives Matter. What we do ask is that you don't tag images with irrelevant information, because it takes away from finding out things and events that we need to know about. And I say we, as in anyone who is who wants to participate, who wants to just learn, and who may possibly want to see that live footage that the younger generation is filming, you know, right then and right now. So the tools that we have in our hand, they are definitely weapons of power for good in this very moment. And I applaud them for everything that they're doing. I just want to see more of it. And in that same breath, as we see more of it, we have to be able to teach how to do it, and you know, within a proper parameter. And also, and we'll probably talk about it a little bit later as we do this conversation, but thinking about not letting anyone take advantage of them if they do happen to have something useful, on the lines of licensing, on the lines of usage, on the lines of taking away their autonomy from what they've actually captured.
Absolutely.
And it would be, you know, a disservice to anybody who's documenting such powerful things, whether it's going to be the protests that we're going on now or something that may happen in their neighborhood. You don't want anybody to take that journalistic freedom from them because they are fearful of what somebody may do to them, or, you know, steal from them. And if there is anything I wanted to implore to the future journalists and future commercial photographers, editorial, food, whatever type of photographer you are, don't let anybody take anything from you. What you create is your property. It is yours to keep, it is yours to share, and it is yours, quite honestly, to make money off of. You know, don't let anybody take that from you, because obviously you are good enough, and we all are good enough. You know, just jumping back on what you were saying earlier, Cassandra, about the diversity in your portfolio. I've heard that too. And you've been in this, you and Keith have been in this longer than me and Oriana have, but we still experience the same things that you all did. Even in, you know, at portfolio reviews, whether it's in Birmingham or one that I've done in New York, or maybe, you know, some that I've done in Atlanta, it's the same narrative. And if I'm Black, who the hell else am I going to take pictures of? I love my folks, and I love the way that we look, and I love the way that we just get down. So it would be a disservice to not capture the folks who I live and breathe for. So let's shift, let's take away this whole thing about you know, Black people having to have certain images in their portfolio, whether digital or print, in order to make it. That's not fair, because I've seen plenty of other photographers have just one, you know, monolith of one subject or one thing, and it's the same people, you know, the all the people look alike, but we have to be the ones that look different. That is, it's just, it's insane to me. But like I was saying, it's just the fact that what you all have experienced is what we have had to experience as well. And now that there's this, you know, cosmic shift in what the world is experiencing now, it has to go. And, you know, whether it's photographers or producers or photo editors who are, you know, on this call right now, you have to listen to us tell you all of that. Because if I'm in a predominantly Black neighborhood, who else am I going to take pictures of? I could go out that side of that, but if those are the people I feel comfortable photographing, whether I'm just learning or not, this is where I want to be. I have a great friend. Her name is Melissa Alexander. She takes pictures in her neighborhood, and that's it. And I love her work. And if she was to shift from that, I would honestly be confused, because she photographs them beautifully. So why would I want to see somebody outside of their own neighborhood? This is me talking about people who go on mission trips unnecessarily. Why would you go outside of your own group of people to exoticize and fetishize? And I probably am messing up words right now because I'm just all heated. But why would I go outside of my own group just to find the beauty in others? If there's beauty in yours, take it there. If it's not, don't come to an area just to befriend people, to benefit off of us, to make money off of us, to take pictures of us and print and do all of these things. Just stop it. You know, just literally stop it, you know?
Right. Just to add to that, like just looking at your bio, Oriana, I love, you know, that it says photo ethnographer.
Yes.
Never heard that before. Never heard that before, but it means something.
It
You
means
know,
something.
writer and historian, you know, so we're, you know, I always hear like, oh, shoot what you love, shoot what you know. Well, I am. And you still have a problem with it, you know what I mean? So telling those stories, you know, I think you're being authentic to yourself. And then, you know, and to your point, Lynsey, and I think Keith, I think you've all made the same point. It's like, this is what we do. This is who we are. We've always been this. We've always done this. You just need to get on board. You know what I mean? But with that said, you know, I'm loving that we're having this dialogue. I'm trying to read all the comments and the questions, and we're getting a lot of high fives and claps and all that kind of stuff, you know, which is amazing. But, you know, like, how do we move forward? You know, and I know that everyone's, you know, doing their own things, you know, telling stories about the people on the street and the people who live in our neighborhood, elevating, you know, small business owners and diverse, you know, perspectives and genders and all that. And I mean, there's no question in my mind that you all are going to continue to do the work that you do, right? There's no question about it. But, you know, as working photographers, you know, and speaking specifically about the business of photography, like, what are some things that you all recommend, or you would like to see, like, more specifically being done to make sure that, you know, photographers, you know, Black and Indigenous and people of color, right, are being seen, being uplifted, being utilized, you know, and not just kind of on the fringes and in the backdrops and only being, you know, gone to when there's a story to tell, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, not being pigeonholed into what we're doing right now.
Right.
Yeah, because it's trend. I mean, I hate to use this word, but it's like, it's trending right now to call all the Black photographers and find, I mean, your Instagram blowing up for a reason, you know what I mean? So like, how do we make sure that this, you know, is actionable and isn't just a trending thing that's happening, you know what I mean?
So I think it's a multi-step thing. And I want to preface this by saying it's not our job as Black photographers to do any given thing in order to get more. I purposely decided to be a photographer and not a photo editor or an art director or a creative director. That's not my that's not my area of expertise, and I'm not being paid a salary to do that work.
Mm-hmm.
So that onus should not be put on my shoulders as someone who is an assignment photographer, who's very clearly made, I've very clearly stated what it is that I do, what I'm interested in, what I would like to do. I even have a section on my website that says, like, if you don't know what to hire me for, here are some ideas of things that
Which I love, by the way.
and I recommend
brilliant.
that every young photographer does that, like, immediately. Think of between 5 to 30 assignments you would want to shoot, put that on your website, and remind people that this is what you're interested in, this is what you want to do. The biggest problem that we have comes from the hiring side. So our hiring organizations and bodies need to think about the importance of hiring people who are actively and openly anti-racist. Because if you put a white supremacist or a racist in a position of power, they are going to use that power, and they're going to use it for the benefit of maintaining supremacy. And that, very clearly, we have recognized, allows them to push everyone else out, to ignore everyone else's work, to send white photographers out to document the sorts of struggles that we have been dealing with historically for 400 years, for them to make the pictures that are going to get them the awards, that's going to get them the attention of the agents, that's going to bring the money in and secure their name and their legacy in the greater scheme of photography. That has to end. It has to stop. I cannot do it because I'm not in charge of hiring. I'm not the person who is deciding who gets to make the decisions about whether or not someone can have a livelihood in this industry. And if we are being very frank with ourselves, there are a lot of people who see themselves as kingmakers, and they see themselves as gatekeepers. They understand that there is a racial and gender wage gap, and they do whatever necessary to maintain that system. The system has to change itself. So our hiring bodies need to get very serious about whether or not they actually do want to be in this for the long run. And part of that long-term commitment is making sure that there are anti-racists in the office, and making sure that people like me and like you and like Lindsey and like Keith have a say-so in upper to higher level executive positions, because you don't see that in any of the publications that we all work for. So how are we supposed to expect that anyone in that space is going to, one, treat us with the respect that we're owed as human beings, two, want to support us in any way to make sure that we have the sorts of careers that are just as beautiful and thriving and exciting as our white counterparts. We deserve that, but we cannot do that on our own. We really, really, really need for photo editors and other people who are hiring to see us as being accomplices. We're working together. We're not, a separate entity from you. It used to be back in the day, photo editors had brilliant relationships with their photographers because they recognized that in building these relationships, it was beneficial not only for the photographer, but it was beneficial for their career. Now you have photo editors who, interned at Teen Vogue for a month, never took a class in photography, have never made a picture in their life, and you're assigning me work? Something is very backwards about that, and we have to be real about it. We have to change. Our industry has to commit to being anti-racist. And in being anti-racist, the majority of the actions that need to take place in order to dismantle white supremacy in photography will happen very naturally.
And to roll off of that, there's the companies that are, a lot of us have been probably getting the same emails about doing this and that as far as being a Black photographer. And, there unfortunately is one organization right now who is trying to profit off. Now, I will give it to them. They are trying to they are doing a donation in the name of Black Lives Matter. But on the back end, it's very predatory in the acts that's going on, not being fully transparent as to, where the images will who will retain the rights to these images, where will they be used, how long, and things of that nature. So having a space where Black photographers can understand, especially if they are just beginning, to understand that they have just as much, if not more talent than our white counterparts. And to learn that, I'm probably, just saying the same thing, but I'll say it again, learning the importance of licensing, how to run your business, having a mentor who is not closing the door to you to help you get to, whatever point you want to get to. So once we dismantle those systems as Oriana presented, then we don't have to hide behind these doors or maintain these secrets that would would deter someone to be in this photography field. And yes, to Aldo, I just have all my windows open, so I see some of the chat as well.
Yeah.
We do need more Black photography mentors. We absolutely do need more. I can attest to that, because a lot of the things that I know comes from me through trial and error, or Google, or wanting to ask a well-established photographer who happened to be white and not being able to talk to them. I can understand you're busy, but at the same time, you can also say, well, hey, I can't do it, here's somebody else. Having that open door would work wonders for a lot of our career. We won't have to take that $50 job because we felt like that was the only thing that we could take at the moment. So absolutely, Black photography mentors, Black creative mentors are a necessity when we are trying to climb this ladder to get to whatever point we want to get to. So yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, and I think we have to kind of get back to, and unfortunately when I started, apprenticeship was a thing that you did. And a lot of youth culture really wanted to get rid of that. They wanted to start now. And I understand that, but I remember when I sought a Black photographer when I got out of college to work for. And I remember feeling like I learned more in 4 weeks than I had learned in 4 years of college. And there's nothing like that apprentice relationship. And so anytime, and then when I, began to teach and mentor young Black photographers, I found it was such a wonderful thing, and particularly now in today's media, because we kind of need each other. I have the experience that can help you grow, and you have the handle of technology that can help me get the word out in these new spaces. I think it's important too that we recognize our power. We've made some slow strides in getting our celebrities and athletes to recognize they need their people that look like them in the glam space, but they haven't really always come out for the photographer or the director. And so I feel like, our music and entertainment is so robust internationally that we have real power. And if we exercise that power, if our athletes and entertainers say, hey, I want a Black photographer on set, or I want a Black director, none of us would want for anything, because we shouldn't. I've been overseas and I've felt that love of, I won't say no racism, but a lot less racism, and appreciation for, my craft, because, African Americans are such the avant-garde of popular culture. Like, we make it go for so many years, that we should deserve to reap the rewards from that. And so I just want to say that if there's a way that we can exercise the new media that allows us to reach people directly and say, hey, don't forget about us in the room. When they want to shoot you for that Nike ad, look around and see if your folks are being represented, and speak up, because they're not going to do it without you. There aren't many spaces that they can do it without you. Absolutely.
So I don't know, let's see, it's 12:10. I guess we can check in here to see if there's any other questions. Feel free to keep the questions coming, because it looks like we're all checking the Q&A. So one thing I want to know is, if each of you can talk a little bit about more specifically what you do, how long you've been doing it, and maybe touch upon a project that you feel has been or is most important that you've worked on, or maybe it's hasn't yet happened. Maybe you're in the process or it's coming down the line. I'd love to hear about that. Whoever wants to start.
I guess I'll start.
Okay.
I consider myself a portrait photographer that works in the music, entertainment, fashion, editorial space. Primarily assignments. However, I've spent a lot of time and years doing my own stories and my own projects, not only to just showcase what I can do, because I wasn't always hired to do that, so I had to do it myself, but I still have that burning desire to illustrate our people in glorious ways. And so my next project is to put a book together of my career and those images that are indicative of what I like to show. And then also begin to show that work in the gallery space. Ideally, the perfect space for me are huge, almost propaganda, giant-sized images of beautiful Black people that are just so large you can't ignore them, and have the majesty of the Sphinx. And so that's where my headspace is right now. But also, it's really important that I share what I know. And so feel free to email me. My email is very simple. It's keith@keithmajor.com, and we can start there. And I will take the time to address and speak with you no matter what level that you're on, because I want to see us all, move forward. I hope I've answered your question.
You have, and I like that you actually put yourself out there and make yourself open to people contacting you. I think that's because that's part of, what's necessary. Yeah.
It's important.
Oriana, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, if it's okay, I wanted to address, I think, what are a series of questions that have come,
I know,
that have been asked, especially regarding documenting protests and how to do it, and if you should repost things and if you shouldn't repost things.
Right, I saw that, yeah.
So the one thing that I want to say, that I am taking this lead from the people who are organizing these protests, specifically the young people who are organizing this protest. And I want for us to be mindful of the history of protests in this country. There's a very specific reason folks are asking you to not post pictures of protesters' faces visible. It doesn't have anything to do with complicating making pictures because of consent. It has nothing to do with trying to restrict how you work as a photojournalist. It has everything to do with the fact that you recognize that in the past, when movements like this have occurred, people have been murdered and they have been jailed for participating. We live in a country that has immense surveillance capabilities, and we are putting at risk the lives of young children who are taking it upon themselves to do what they can to save us right now. We need to be mindful of that. You can continue to make your pictures and you can continue to share those pictures. Just keep in mind that you could possibly share a picture that could get someone harmed or killed. So, do your thing, but just be mindful of that.
Thank you for that.
And I say this as someone who taught youth for quite a few years. A lot of my own coming into myself as a photographer and as a human being is directly precipitated by the time that I've spent in classrooms with youth, high school age, teaching them photography basics, explaining to them that they have a right to their stories, that they should document their stories. And it also comes from having been a young person who started their career documenting protests. The first thing I ever shot that got published were a series of images that I took when I went to a small town outside of New Orleans known as Genoa, Louisiana, because 6 Black high school students were accused of beating up a white classmate, and that turned into a series of nooses being hung from trees in front of their homes, them being suspended from school and possibly facing prison. I don't do that work anymore because it's just not how I have come to find that I can talk about my people and talk about the things that interest me. So that's why I've been focused on food for the last 5 years, and specifically the contributions that Black people have made to American foodways. All of those contributions have been erased over time. there's very, very little photographic evidence of the role that we've played in terms of creating and maintaining a food system that everyone gets to benefit off of in this country. And that has also led me to, reading up on history and really having an understanding of what white supremacy is, how it affects the work that I do, how it affects the way that other people consume the work that I'm doing. And so the one thing that I tell young photographers especially is to be rigorous about the work that you are doing. I spent a year and a half on meetings, just meeting new clients. And the one thing that I heard consistently was how impressed people were that I was able to give them an elevator pitch of exactly what it was that I was interested in and what I was doing. And it dawned on me very quickly that our white counterparts are not doing this sort of work. So I decided to use that as a way to distinguish myself from everyone else in my industry. But the more I do this work, the more I recognize that when you are working at a high level, you should be able to explain to anyone in about 5 sentences what it is that you're doing. And when you're not capable of doing that, you are not doing your work as a photographer. So never, ever let go of the fact that you should be constantly learning about what it is that you're doing. That's the basis of all the work that I do. I have to pick up a book and read. I need some additional sources. I got to go talk to, a historian. I need to know what it is that I'm working out of, so that way I am portraying it in a manner that is honoring both the past history, what it's doing in the present, and what it could possibly do in the future.
Lynsey, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I am primarily a portrait photographer. And it's something about the little known stories, the little known nuances of people that trigger this fire within me. And though history was my least favorite subject, the history of just individual people, just listening to their stories, is what I usually gravitate to. So that allows me to, have this energy that comes from that person where we connect, and then that's where you see the power of that portrait come out. So I really enjoy being in that space with most people, just learning just how they grew up, where they're from, where they are now, and where they're going. That's what I primarily focus on, and that same portrait work shifts over to my commercial and my editorial work. And yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you.
Oh, and and may I add one more thing? Just
Absolutely.
to piggyback off of what Keith said, I don't mind helping who I can when I can. So I can put my information in the chat box, and if anyone wants to reach out to me, whatever that question may be, because I can't say we need Black mentors without saying, here I am, I can help you where I can. And if I can't, I'll be sure to see that resource. So I'll make sure I put my information in the chat box if anybody wants to chat with me.
Thank you. And I do see that some, like Oriana just answered a question that I was just about to ask. So thank you for that. I'm gonna ask one more question here. And I think it kind of goes back to something we touched upon earlier about portfolios and the type of work we have in our portfolio. And it's from David. And it says, if a Black advertising photographer's portfolio is exclusively documenting Black culture, is it reasonable to expect an art director to consider them for a shoot documenting white culture? And conversely, is it reasonable to expect an art director to consider a white photographer with a portfolio exclusively documenting white culture to be considered to photograph a campaign documenting Black culture? So I know we kind of skirted around that a little bit, but if you want to take that on.
The answer is obvious. I mean, no, if you're a Black photographer and you predominantly have a portfolio of Black culture, you ought to be considered for the Black ad. It would be a stretch to be considered for the white ad. People don't have that kind of imagination. Now, the Black photographer may be able to shoot white folks, but that's not in his portfolio. Conversely, with the white photographer, now the problem is that what has happened is the white photographer can walk in with a portfolio of all white people, have no Black people, and get the Black job.
Black job.
That's the issue. That's the issue right there.
Right.
And then an entire white culture that has profited off of Black people in their photos, whether that's going to be, you know, in the entertainment section or just pretty much anything.
Yeah, I don't even want to mention names, but I can remember one photographer, and many of you are going to know who this person is, and I can't wait to see him because I want to figure it out. I want to figure out how you can do this. Like this white photographer who has done very well in the hip hop community. And when Dana Scruggs got the Rolling Stone cover, he had the nerve to say, been there, done that. And it was like, do you realize we have not had a Rolling Stone cover? Like, what, really, who are you? Like, where are you coming from? And
do you mind
a Rolling Stone cover, like, we don't have music in this country without us. And yet, this is the first time that we've had a Black person do a cover. She was Black female. It's like, and you, like, and that's my privilege for you there.
And the thing that I need explained to me, and I asked this question of I don't know how many students I talked to last year at this photo conference. I need to understand what whiteness is. I don't know what white culture is. And so I feel like, you know, if a human being is taking pictures of human beings and that's in their portfolio, and then they get assigned work of any sort to photograph other human beings, that doesn't seem like a very difficult thing. But when we start talking about, well, you know, a Black photographer only has Black culture in their portfolio, so how dare they shoot white people? I need for you to explain to me, and I'm not kidding, I need for you to explain to me what whiteness is. Because a large majority of part of the reason we're in the pickle we're in right now is because white photographers have not been doing their work. You haven't shown me what whiteness is. I don't have any understanding of your culture, none. I would like to have a deeper understanding of your culture, but I can't do that if you're not giving me anything to work with, if there is no actual definition or anything that you can pull and be like, this exactly is white culture. What I know white culture to be is white supremacy. So if that's what we're talking about, we need to make that very plain. And I don't think that we should be conflating that with whether or not a Black person is capable of getting the same job that a white photographer is capable of getting. That's kind of what I'm getting from that question.
And can I just throw in, this is Julia, I just wanted, yesterday in the conversation along this line, you mentioned Michael Santiago. So could you just mention something about?
Yeah, so that being said, Michael Santiago, who won the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, or helped as part of the team who won the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette a Pulitzer, was told that he and another Black journalist were banned from documenting the largest civil rights movement that's ever happened globally, citing bias because they're Black. That's what's been happening over the last 3 or 4 days for Black photographers. That's what we have had to sit with.
Crazy.
Yep. Along with images being used in other publications without recognition or permission. That's also what we've been going to. So that's why I've been harking on licensing, because listen, you know, it's already bad enough that we're out here documenting it, but you know, give proper credit where credit is due. It's too much going on to be, you know, constantly taking from us when we are already having so much stolen from us daily. So just you know, do the due diligence and do the good work, you know, behind what you're supposed to do.
I'm gonna throw out one last question, and then I think we'll try to wrap up because it's about 12:30. This was an earlier question asked, and it says, it's from an anonymous attendee, and it says, as a white woman supporting Black Lives Matter and the fight for racial justice in my city, how would you suggest I share my images from the protest, or should I at all? Should I tag or not tag? I'm fiercely dedicated to the movement, but of course want to remain sensitive and respectful. What would you guys say?
I would say this. What I need as a Black person, I'm talking to this person directly. What I need from you to do right now is to not be too concerned about sharing protest pictures. I need for you to have conversations with your family members, with your bosses, with your friends, about why you are personally divesting from white supremacy and why you want them to join. That's what we need white people to be doing right now. There's a lot of catch-up work that has to be done. And a majority of that catch-up work is finally confronting those pillars of supremacy that you have been too afraid to say anything to. Because once we figure out what to do with our policing system, white supremacy doesn't go away, racists don't go away. And history has shown that racists really enjoy engaging in backlash. And when they engage in backlash, Black people die, period. You have to open your mouth and you have to start holding your friends and family members to task. That is your specific work in this movement. What can you do? How can you show up to contribute to make sure that you are actively challenging and dismantling white supremacy in every moment that it comes to you? That's your specific work.
Because a check-in with me as a Black person doesn't do much. Those conversations that you consider to be hard are the ones that we have every day. So yeah, every single day, whether we are doing it verbally or we're doing it mentally, those conversations are still reeling in our head all of the time. So, you know, to our anonymous attendee friend, those hard conversations are going to be beneficial to yourself, to your family, to your friends, the friend who is constantly telling you that all lives matter, that friend, those groups of people, and just start there. Because if you don't have, you never talk, if you're passive about it, we won't get to, you know, at least some type of solution to this constant problem that's in the black space.
Reminds me of a woman that was a writer, a white woman that asked me a question once several years ago. She said she was writing some kind of play or something on race relations. And she said, "Can you tell me something that I wouldn't know as a white person?" And I think she was looking for an answer, and I didn't give her the answer she was looking for. I said to her that white people see themselves as normal and everyone else is other. And I think that's where white supremacy lives, in that space. It's like, we don't have culture because we are the culture and everyone else is others, you know? It's sort of like, we're here, we are the people, and the rest of the other people are interesting and exotic and different. And it's like, no, we are all human beings.
Absolutely.
You know, and these issues of race are really your issues.
Right, and someone just actually wrote in there saying it's white people's responsibility to call out racism. I mean, there's a lot of really good things going on here. I feel like we could talk forever. I feel like there's so much to uncover, so much to digest, express, you name it. So I guess, and let's see, that just got another, oh yeah, so people are just thanking everyone for the conversations, the words, the presence. And, you know, again, this is an ongoing thing. I think Juliet touched upon that in the beginning. You know, we as an organization, you know, we are even apologizing for not having done this sooner, or things like this sooner, you know. So we're calling on you all, Keith, Lynsey, Oriana, even people who are attending, to talk to us, chat with us. You know, I mean, I put my email address in the chat. You can go on to apanational.org. You can look up individual chapters and individual cities and just reach out. I mean, we want to hear from everybody about everything. We want you all coming to the events. We want you all participating. We want you all talking, you know, again, about all the various experiences. So, you know, I just want to say thank you all again. And if there's anything that you'd like to say in closing, I'd love to open it up to you guys. If there's anything else you want to add in closing, Keith, Lynsey, Oriana.
I would just, well, first of all, just thank you for this. I have been in my own little echo chamber at the moment, just because everything has been extremely overwhelming, but it's refreshing to hear other people talk about experiences and to be understood, to be seen and felt. So thank you so much for this, and thank you to everybody who decided to take time out of their day to come listen to us. and want to see change and dynamics shift during this time. So I'm very appreciative of what happened today.
Thank you. Thank you. And Oriana, Keith?
Having these spaces, being invited into these spaces, first of all, is a new thing. So I would really recommend that any major photographic organization, please open your doors to us. We are part of the community. We want to feel like we're part of the community. And a really easy way to do that is just to do exactly what APA did, which was, hey, there's a lot going on. You probably want to talk about it. Would you be willing to do it? Those invitations are how we build community with one another. And we are a community. Yes, we all have cameras. Yes, we're making pictures, but we also believe in the power of image making. And that belief is what ties us and binds us as a community. And I just want to say, especially to the youth who often feel like it's impossible, no one's listening, no one's paying attention to you. I came into my strength as an early career photographer by linking up with other early career photographers. And we became each other's mentors. We became each other's agents. We advocated for one another. We passed jobs on to each other. There are lots of ways to build a really robust career if you have people that you trust who are also learning alongside you. It really lessens the burden of feeling like you're going to be alienated forever. You will not be. You are going to find your people. And the sooner you find your people, the sooner you start to see your success blossom. So we should all remember, as a larger photographic community, we're in this together. When you succeed, I succeed. That's how this works. It can't just be a handful of us. If one person is not doing well, the entirety of the community is not. So we have to think about the ways in which we can uplift the people who are really having a hard time struggling, whether it's because of their gender, their sexuality, their race, or their age. They are a part of our community. They are human beings, and that makes them important. So let's keep that in mind.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for everybody involved in this for including me. It's an honor to be with you guys, and I really enjoyed meeting Oriana and Lynsey this way and hearing what they have to say. I feel like I'm learning once again, and I love that part of this kind of conversation. And I want to thank Juliet for staying on me. I know that I've been I see you every once in a while, and thank you for remembering to include me in something like this. And Cassandra, thank you so much for your
Very
moderating.
welcome. Very welcome. And me personally, you know I joined APA, I think maybe 10 years ago. And, you know, I was hesitant at first because it was like, you know, you're coming out of photo school and you're like, oh, I can join this, I can join that. And one of the reasons I chose APA was because of things like this, you know, and there has been a shift. You know, we've had so many wonderful events and things that I've gone to. And, you know, I can think even 2 years ago when I went and I met some other photographers of color, and they were just so, you know, welcoming and kind and helpful. And we linked up and they've become mentors, you know what I mean? And I wouldn't have met them had I not gone to that event, had I not entered that contest. So, you know, I'm saying that to say, I would love to personally see you guys, you know, show up and show out at some of these things that we have coming up. I know right now everything's virtual, so there's not many in-person things. But, you know, it would mean a lot to me personally to see more representation across the board at these events, you know. So I just want to say that, and just again, thank you each for, you know, being here, for expressing and talking, and for your candor. I mean, it means a lot, I think, to, you know, because it's very heavy and there's so many, I mean, there's so much that we didn't even touch upon. So, you know, again, I just want to thank you for that. And
well, you know what, Cassandra, I want to thank folks like you and Keith who setting the standard for us to kind of just follow, you know, up to, because if it weren't for you all standing your ground in certain spaces, there would be no place for us. So we definitely have to tell you and Keith, thank you so much. You know, because it means the world. It means the world to us, and I'm getting emotional, but it means the world to us that we are even in this space to do it. So thank you to both of you and everybody who has, you know, been in this space way longer than us, and we are able to be here to document, you know, just anything that we want to, not just be pigeonholed to anything, but to do any and everything that we want to. So thank you.
Yeah, it was never lost on us that we had to make a way for you. It's never lost that, you know, we had to represent so that, you know, more of us can come through.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
indeed.
Absolutely.
We'll be following up with an email.
Yes.
And if you are watching this later and you're like, wait, I didn't get an email with the resources because I didn't watch. Well, you should sign up next time and watch it. Then we can also send it to you. You can let me know and I'll send you the list.
Right, and we do have on the apanational.org site, we do have some resources, you know, to support photographers of color. It's by no means is it, you know, an exhaustive list. It's, you know, so we're constantly learning and updating, but, you know, we have started putting some things out there. So feel free to reach out to me, Juliet, if you all have additional things to share, because it's, you know, it's extremely important that we get it and we get it out there, you know, and that it's meaningful. It's not just words, you know what I mean? It's something that is very purposeful, you know what I'm saying? So we need to make sure we get it right. And so if you go on there and you see something like, oh, I don't know about, you know, just reach out, you know, like, because I feel like you said, Oriana, you know, we're one large community. You know, it's easy to sit back and say, oh, you know, so-and-so's not doing this, so-and-so's not doing that. I wish this, I wish that. But it's like, great, well, then let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation. Let's bubble it up. I mean, I'm a doer. I've always been a doer. You all are doers. So, which is another reason why you're here. And, you know, we appreciate that. So, Juliet, I don't know if you want to close or if you want me to close and mention maybe some of our upcoming events that we have. I know we have this Thursday, we have an APA LA webinar, Navigating the Unknown with Andrea Stern of Ask Stern Rep. And then we also have an open talk hosted by Travis Keys this Thursday with guests Jessica Foley and Stephen Irby. So those are just some of the things we have coming up. I can't wait until we can get back out there and physically, you know, meet up and do some of those fun things. But, you know, just go online, check us out and see what's going on and join us. We'd love it.
Thank you.
Love to have you all. Juliet, anything else you want to add to that, or?
That's wonderful. Thank you. You did a great job. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your it is Tuesday, right? Yeah, the rest of your Tuesday. And I know for certain that we will all be chatting in the near future and beyond. So thank you all so much.
All right, thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Make love, not war.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care. I'm trying to figure out how to end the recording, Juliet.
Oh. There's little details.
Like if I end the recording, if I had